And as we've been doing over the past several months, if there are any folks that are new to the group, this is your first meeting. We usually call this our beginner's corner, but if you're new to the group, whether you're a beginner or not, please feel free to introduce yourself. Any new folks? All right, I guess you've all been here before. Any beginner type questions before we get started with the main presentation?
I don't really have I guess it's not a beginner question. Maybe it is best suited for the discussion that you mentioned at the end of the meeting. I was wondering if I could talk to folks that might be using a StellarMate Pro for their astrophotography imaging sessions. I'm more familiar with the ZWO ASIR stuff and everything, but I also have purchased a StellarMate Pro a couple months ago. I was a little frustrated with some of their firmware updates and the bugs they were introducing in that, and so I wanted to have a backup. And I'm a little familiar with ECOS and some of the stuff there, but I was hoping to find people on the forum that had a lot more experience with that. So maybe in the end of the program, talking to some of those folks might be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I think there may be somebody who uses StellarMate Pro or at least has experience with it. Let's hold that for the very end, and then we'll come back to that question. Any other beginner type stuff? All right. No bringing up beginners questions later on.
When's the weather going to clear up so we can actually have some cloudless nights?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a good beginner question.
All right. Well, tonight, David Stearn has volunteered to lead us through a discussion of the narrowband normalization tool in Pixinsight. And if you've seen any of David's images that he posts regularly, you probably appreciate the fact that he's kind of got this in hand. So I'm going to let him take over. And I think he would prefer if you hold your questions to the end, but if it turns out to be something you just can't hold back on, I'm sure he'll be glad to try to answer your question. So, David, if you're ready, please go ahead and feel free to share your screen.
Sure, let me just okay, let me make sure everybody can see what I'm seeing here first. Do a check. Can everybody see my PowerPoint screen with the title?
Yep.
Looks
Okay,
good.
great.
Yes.
Zoom always gets me confused because I try to minimize the windows, and now you should be able to see my Pixinsight screen as well, correct? You see
Yes.
the picture?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, just wanted to do a sanity check to make sure everybody could see what I'm seeing here, because I'll be flipping back and forth occasionally between both PowerPoint and Pixinsight. So a little background. I've been in this hobby for about 2 years and 3 months. And it all started when my wife said, "Hey, instead of buying gifts for each other this year, let's go buy a telescope." And my wife, who is now using her AirPods to watch TV, she can't hear what I'm saying, luckily for me. She thought that, oh, we'll just get a telescope, go in the backyard, get a glass of wine, and look at the stars and the moon and the planets and stuff. Well, as I got further in the research, I got more involved with this, and I figured, okay, this is, for me, being a photographer and having done it for a while as an amateur, I'm going to go beyond just watching things visually. So we bought the equipment at Star Arizona. I bought my first rig. I've added on to it slowly but surely. But the point I'm trying to bring out is when I was researching this hobby, and I knew nothing about it when I entered in the hobby, other than used an Astro camera, was the fact that I saw a lot of images on Astro's bin specifically, and some on Facebook, where people were using what was called the Hubble Palette. And my initial rig had Optolong L Pro, so that was strictly for broadband use. And I was able to capture emission nebulas with that. But I really liked the look of the Hubble palette. I thought it was really creative. I liked the colors. And I said, boy, it'd be great if I could take pictures and images of nebula and produce those types of images. And I ran across a few images where they mentioned that they were using a Bill Blanchard narrowband normalization script. And again, this was a couple years ago. So I looked up Bill's YouTube channel, and he had the script for narrowband normalization, and he also had a bunch of other scripts you could use. And I'll show a few of those to you later on in the demonstration. But that's how I got started. I bought an IDAS NBZ UHS filter, which paired well with my C8 using the Hyperstar 8 because it was meant for high speed. It could go up to F4. And being that the Hyperstar was at F2 approximately, it worked really well. And it helped isolate the HA and the O3 emission lines in an emission nebula. And that's basically how I got started. I've been using this when it was in a script form. I've been using that for several iterations of the script. I also got to know Bill well over Facebook and Messenger. We actually chatted a couple times on the phone. I've been a beta tester for some of his scripts and for stuff that you might be seeing later on in the future. And I also learned the proper workflow by communicating with Bill. And one thing I will caution you about, when you go into YouTube and you look up narrowband normalization, you're going to see some videos. Some of these videos are from people that are well recognized for astrophotography, and they're demonstrating an incorrect workflow. And I'll talk a little about that later on, but it's messing a lot of people up because they think they're doing it right because so-and-so said it looked good, and this is how they do it, and it was completely wrong. And I actually have gotten to the point now where I can tell by looking at somebody's image whether they did the pre-processing correct prior to using narrowband normalization. And there is a pre-workflow that you need to be cognizant about before you start actually using the process itself. But what's really nice about this process is it automates it allows you to boost the O3 and the S2 emission lines in an emission nebula to match the same intensity of the HA. Now, that sounds like a pretty simple statement, but if you just Googled or searched on YouTube how to create a Hubble image with a one-shot color camera as an example, there are videos from 5, 6 years ago on people attempting to do the same thing, whether it be in Pixinsight or some other processing program. And it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. You have to go through, you have to split the channels, you have to do some pixel math and do a lot of curve stretches. It's not an easy feat. And especially for a newcomer coming into this hobby, having something like narrowband normalization that allows you to do something that would take, at least 30, 45 minutes of your time or more, and doing it in a couple seconds, as I'll be able to show you later, is quite a feat. So I figured my timing was great. I wanted to start doing this type of artsy type photography with my emission type images and actually get to the point where I could hang a picture on my wall, so to speak, that I would be proud of. So that's what this is all about. It's not about natural color or making your image scientifically accurate. And I know there are those who prefer that, and that's a preference. And I appreciate a good natural image as well. I do that all the time with my broadband images. But from the standpoint of actually being able to create something from an artistic standpoint, this is really the basis for that. It's just one step in the workflow. Now, what Bill Blanchard did was he took his scripts and he teamed up with Mike Cranfield. And if you're familiar with GHS as an example, generalized hyperbolic stretch, that was one of Mike's projects. And it was for free. You don't have to pay for this stuff, which is great. So Bill teamed up with him and took his code, and Mike built the interface for it. And that's how you have narrowband normalization today. Narrowband normalization is designed to be used either in a linear or nonlinear data. My preference is to use nonlinear data because the process, as you'll see, takes advantage of what's called lightness control. If you're using linear data, make sure you turn that control off, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. It can be used for a one-shot color camera using a dual narrowband filter, such as a IDAS-NBZ or an L Extreme, where you're isolating the HA and O3 emission lines. But it can also be used if you have two narrowband filters. And I actually have two now that I use. I have the IDAS-NBZ UHS. I've recently gotten the Optolong El-Para filter because that can work over multiple focal lengths beyond f4. And then I also use the ASCAR D2 filter, which isolates the S2 and the O3. So using those two filters, not only can you capture the HA and O3, you can also capture S2, and also you can capture additional O3. So it saves you a night of imaging. And then for mono, of course, if you have a LRGB filter set and you also have narrowband filters, you just use your regular SHO narrowband filters as well. So it can work in all three of those scenarios. From a workflow standpoint, probably the simplest is with a duo narrowband filter and a one-shot color camera. And this is the workflow that I follow consistently, and I haven't had any issues with it. If you're taking images on a somewhat moonlight evening, or there's some light pollution, then you might want to run a gradient removal program. Just be careful it doesn't play with your nebulosity and the integrity of the image. But typically, if I'm shooting on a dark night and my flats are good, I'm using blur exterminator followed by background neutralization, then star exterminator, and I usually save the stars because I'm going to use those later on within the processing workflow. I do an unlinked stretch, and this is very important. Do not do a linked stretch. Also, do not run a color calibration process like SPCC or photometric color calibration. The main reason why is it's going to mess up your colors, especially if you're using a narrowband filter. You don't want to do that. Noise exterminator is what I'll do after the stretch. You could do it prior to it. It's pretty flexible to use it either way. And then I run narrowband normalization. So that's the basic workflow. Typical mistakes I see that people make with this process is they'll run SPCC and then they'll do a link stretch. And the problem is the colors get messed up. And I've seen people demonstrate this on YouTube where they're kind of winging it, going along just to see how it works out while they're doing the YouTube. And then they end up spending a bulk of the demonstration fixing it in Photoshop later on because the colors are all messed up. Okay, so now I'm going to go into Pixinsight and I'm going to bring up the narrowband normalization tool. I put this in as a shortcut, but also you would go into process, all processes, and bring it up that way as well. This is now a certified process within Pixinsight. I'm not sure whether you still have to put in the link into your resources or not. You may or may not have to. If you haven't installed it in your resources directory yet, chances are it might be out there as a process already. But the one thing I want to mention to you about this process is if you have a question regarding any of these fields, there's two ways to get an answer. One is just click your arrow on the section of the window, and it'll give you a quick explanation of what it's for. The other thing is there's a complete documentation folder here. And excuse me, I'm just going to move this over a little bit to give you some room. So everything here for this process is documented. It gives you all the information on each step of the process. So if you have any technical questions or you wonder how are things working behind the scene, it even gives you the math and the formulas behind it, as you can see here on the screen. So it's all there for you. I'm not going to go through all the technical details. I'm not a technical person. I'm more of just a photographer who likes to process deep sky objects. But there is a video that Bill Blanchard put out. I will send a link to everybody via email. It's a very good way to get an understanding of how the process works in detail. And he also gives you several different examples similar to what I'm going to show you today. So for this first example, I'm going to take an image that I shot last year of the Cygnus Wall using my 533 MC Pro camera and my IDAS NBC UHS filter. I already ran it through the steps. So I went through and ran Blur Exterminator. I removed the stars. I ran the unlinked stretch after doing a background neutralization. Did all that stuff up front for you so we didn't have to spend a lot of time with it. So this is the actual image we're going to edit at this point. It's gone through the stretch process. Now, when I click this, you'll see already that the colors have changed now a little bit. That's because it's gone through the normalization process. And you'll also see there is a palette screen here, a palette section. This is the palette that the image is in itself. So for example, in this case, it's a dual narrowband filter. We only have hydrogen and oxygen, so it's going to be an HOO by default. Do not think that if you go here and you click on SHO, that it's going to change it into the SHO or the Hubble Light palette or HSO and so forth. It's not going to do that. It'll tweak the colors, but that's what it's not designed to do that. It's designed to take the palette that the image is in. And I'll show you some other examples later on of SHO. If this is a nonlinear image, you can use the lightness control panel. This has several settings. If it's a linear image, just keep it off. Otherwise, it will be washed out. Or you can keep it in preserve mode, which means that it's going to keep the same lightness as it was in the original image based on the different luminance channels. But typically, if it has HA in it, look at the Cygnus Wall itself and look how it changes. As you can see, it's brightened it up a little bit. It's highlighted it more because I'm using HA as my lightness. So if I set it off, this is what it looks like. Preserve, HA. O3 is there for people who want to use it, but frankly, I don't think you're going to want to use it at all. It doesn't really lend much to any of the images that I've been involved with. So HA. And then from here, once we set the palette and the lightness, now we go into what's the blend mode. And again, there's all sorts of documentation on what the modes are. To keep this short and simple, I either keep it in mode 1, which is more what Bill refers to as the leukomatical mode. If you know Luke Newbold from Leukomatical on YouTube, he actually developed a workflow to take a one-shot color camera and make it into a Hubble-like palette image before Bill Blanchard even wrote a script. And now he actually has some more recent videos, I think there are like 2 or 3 of them, where he's using this process or the previous script versions. So from here, I can change the blend mode, either mode 1 or mode 3. And I go between these two. I usually don't use mode 1. It's just a method of how they're using the blend amount and changing it. But let's go to mode 3. Let's keep it here. There's also a blend amount. The default is 0.6, but I can change it. I can go to the right. And notice how we're bringing in more green tint to the image, more like a Hubble type image. Or I can move it all the way to the left. But typically, I'll leave this at 0.6. SCNR is not applicable here. It is applicable when we get to an SHO type image. And we do have the ability in this case, because there's no S2, obviously, the only option we're going to have is O3. So if I want to boost this a little bit, I can do that. I wouldn't recommend bringing it all the way up. It tends to kind of make the image look very garish. So I would say if you want to move it up a little bit, that's fine. That's up to you. There's also a shadow point adjustment, and this is used to bring up any faint emissions that you can't see on the screen. Now, if I bring this up all the way, as you can see, it brought up the O3 all the way up. It doesn't look that great from my perspective, but you could bring it up a little bit if you want to. If anything, I might move it up just a tad, but I'm not going to bring it up all the way. The more you bring it up, the more noise it also creates. So I might bring it up just a tad to bring up some of the faint emission nebulas. And then there's also a highlight reduction. For example, I'll go here and I can see I'm not really blown out. I don't really need this a lot, but if I did, I could just adjust it like this. Just it up or adjust it down. That's up to you. There's also a brightness mode. This kind of emulates what an HT or histogram transformation does using MTF. I could go here like this, and now I could bring up more details. For some images, I'll go into GHS, and I'll show you that later on with the Dragons of Aura Nebula and how that works. But this is basically the point of what we're doing. We'll go ahead, we'll commit to it, and then I'll get out of this, get out of this, and then here's the finished image. So this is before using narrowband normalization, and then this is after. So that's just one example of how we can do it. Another example would be the Tadpole Nebula. Oh, wrong one. That is correct one. Here's the correct one. This is the before. So if I bring narrowband normalization for this one, again, it's an HOO image. Go to the preview mode, and I'm going to go to mode 3. Notice the change in the color between mode 1 and mode 3 with the O3 area. I can give this a little bit of a boost if I want. And sometimes when you bring up the boost a little bit, it does raise the values of the RGB channel. Anytime it goes to a 9 or above, I know I'm getting close to blowing the highlights, and then you lose all your detail. So I could take my highlight reduction, and as you can see, it reduces it somewhat. Then as a final step, I might want to bring the brightness up just a tad. And let's assume that I like that. Now here's the finished image. This is before, and this is after. So it's quite a dramatic difference. Now, when you go into Bill Blanchard's YouTube video on this process, he also has listed in the description area on the bottom of the video, there are some other utilities or scripts that he has written that can really be helpful. For example, this is a yellow mask that I'm going to apply. So here's the actual mask. This is identifying where the yellow areas are within the image. And I'll go ahead and I'll use mask blur at least 2 times. And then I'll apply this to the image. And now I'll go into curves, go into preview mode. And if I want to bring out the HA a little bit more in the image, I'll just bring the red channel up just a little bit. This is before, this is after. And then I'll mix a little bit of green in with it, just a slight amount. And I might just back off on it a little bit. And now we can bring out the HA a little bit more. We're doing our little attempt here of trying to make an HOO image look more like an SHO image. So this is what it looks like before and after. Just add a little more glow to it. And I could do the same thing with the blue channel, but I just want to give you an idea of what you could do beyond running narrowband normalization. Now, this is the point where you can actually tweak the colors, typically enhance the yellows and the blues, and tweak them however you want based on your preference. Okay, so that is the HOO version. Now, what I do today is I use 2 narrowband filters, as I mentioned. I use either the IDAS NBZ UHS filter, or I'll use the ASCAR D2, which also has S2, as well as additional O3. I end up with two master lights. When I'm done running WBPP in Pixinsight, I'll have the master light for the NBZ filter, the other one for the D2 filter. So it takes a little more steps before I can get to the point where I'm going to use narrowband normalization. And the first thing that I've learned through trial and error is star alignment. And I never even knew this particular process was available in Pixinsight before until I realized that both of my master lights didn't match up. So I ran star alignment, usually using the NBZ filter as the reference. And it runs very quickly. It's very easy to use. If you used it before, you're probably familiar with it already. But I just wanted to make sure all my stars were aligned. So I do that first. Then I just do a slight dynamic crop to make sure that everything looks even and there are no edges left over from the star alignment process. And then this is very important. There is a utility now, or a script, called DB Extract. If you just Google it, DB Extract Pixinsight, you'll find it. You copy that link to it from that website and you move it over into your resources in Pixinsight, and then it becomes a normal script for you to use in Pixinsight. This will actually take the two master light images and you define in the utility what the filters are that you want to extract from, and it actually generates an SHO version of it, as if you took it with a mono camera, and it does it within 15 seconds. It doesn't take long to run it. And now you have an S, an H, and an O channel to work with. So then for each of those channels that the DB extract utility creates, I then do that same process that I was doing for the one-shot color. Using the one filter, I run blur exterminator, star exterminator. I do save the stars for each channel, because then I'll use another utility to actually bring them all together and make the narrowband stars RGB. Then I run what's called channel combination on the starless channels. So I'm mapping my S, H, and O to RGB. Then from there, I do background neutralization. I run an unlinked stretch, or run noise exterminator, and then I run narrowband normalization. So really the only difference here is I'm dealing with three channels. I have to do a few steps beforehand before I can get everything to work properly. And then I go into narrowband normalization. So an example of that is a recent project I did with the Rosette Nebula. This has all been prepped ahead of time. And this is a typical image you would see if you're using a mono camera with narrowband filters and doing channel combination, and you stretched it. This is basically what you would get. So from here, I'll bring up narrowband normalization. Instead of using HOO as the palette, I'm going to use SHO as the palette. And then for my lightness, again, I have a choice of running this as, I'm going to do the preview first. Here's the preview. Notice if I use the wrong palette, by the way, this is what you get. You don't want that. You want to use the correct palette. SHO, I can use preserve mode or HA. Notice how when I use HA, it kind of highlights the hydrogen in the image. Now from here, because I'm using S, H, and O, and the green channel is kind of dominant in this case, it has a built-in SCNR utility. So I can go ahead and I can get leave as much green as I want, or take it all out. I realize it's St. Patrick's Day, but I don't really like green, so I'm going to take the majority of it out. There are some people out there that like to leave a little bit in, but I'm not a fan of it. I can also boost the O3 if I want to. I can even boost the S2, or I can decrease it. I mean, you can go either way with this. It's really up to whatever your preference is and how you want that image to look. I do have that shadow point control. You're probably going to see it more defined here, just because of the fact that we're dealing with an SHO image. But if I just want to bring this up just a little bit, I can do that and bring out some of those faint emissions. As you can see here, my blue channel is above 9. So I'd like to reduce that as much as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and run a little highlight reduction here. And now if I go back here, yeah, some areas are still in the 9 mode, or 9 level, but they're really reduced now. And now I can bring up the brightness if I want as well, just to bring out some of the emission nebula gas that I was missing out on when I ran the highlight. So this is before, this is after. If I want to commit to this, I can do that. And don't worry about the preview. It looks weird when you first do it, but this is it. This is the before, and this is the after, and it took me maybe normally if I'm just going ahead and I'm processing without describing it, it would probably take like 10 seconds. Now, the final image I want to show you is a mono image. And I don't have a mono camera yet. I think I'll eventually end up getting a mono camera and getting a filter set, maybe within the next year or so. But these are images that I typically acquire from sources like Telescope Live. I'm also a member of the Amateur Astronomy Association out of New York City, which has their own remote setups, both in Texas and now in Chile. And they're shooting mono all the time. So I've had a lot of practice on how to process mono narrowband images using these two sources. So for this, it's simpler than doing the one-shot color with 2 filters. You're basically running blur exterminator, star exterminator, channel combination, then background neutralization, unlinked stretch, noise exterminator, and narrowband. So pretty much the same flow as you saw with the previous version, except I didn't have to do a star alignment or a crop or anything like that. Pretty straightforward flow. So for this one, I'm going to use one of the first images I took from Telescope Live or acquired and practiced mono processing on was NGC 6188, also known as the Dragons of Ara. It's a beautiful nebula in the southern hemisphere. Another thing that's really good about sources like Telescope Live is I can work with images that I would never be able to image myself unless I had a remote scope set up or if I traveled to that region of the world. So it's a nice thing to work with. So now I'm going to work with this image. Again, it's a mono image. Put in the preview mode. So this was before with the lightness off, preserve mode, and this is with HA. And I like the HA the best. Most of the images I'm going to use HA as my lightness. Now there are exceptions. For example, the Veil Nebula doesn't have a lot of HA to it, so you might as well keep it on preserve or off. Same thing with the Dolphin Head Nebula. When I processed SH2308 a few months ago, or about a month or so ago, I found that without HA, it's not even worth running the lightness for it. So this is something you got to play with each image. I'm going to go ahead and use the SCNR because, again, I am not a big fan of green. I'll boost the O3 up a little bit here, as well as the S2. I try to be careful with the colors. I don't want to oversaturate these things. I mean, you are using false color and you could do what you want, I guess, but I try to do this within a reasonable amount. I don't want to go overboard on it. I can also use the shadow point again, do a slight adjustment there. There really aren't a lot of highlights here. I'll just tone it down just a little bit. And I'm not going to use the brightness control because I've worked with this image before and I know there's a lot more detail in this image that I can get through other means. So I'm just going to go ahead and commit to this. Get rid of the preview. And here we have the image. And here I'm going to show you a little trick that I developed through my workflow. I'm going to bring up GHS. Everyone should be able to see it now. There's a little bug in Pixinsight with the Mac. For some reason, When I flip to GHS, it gets you out of the program. You have to get back in. And it's been going on for some time now through various iterations of Pixinsight. But as you can see by this histogram here, there's some space here on the left. That means there's more detail that I can get. Ideally, you want a histogram that's going to go out as far as it can go out without clipping either the lights or the darks. So what I'll do to get more detail, I'll go into linear mode, bring up the preview, and now I'm going to use a little caret here by the histogram. And I'm looking visually at the histogram. I don't really care about where it says low clipping. If it's not 1 or above, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to bring it down just a little bit so I have more room to do a further stretch. Commit to that. Now I'm going to look at some of the dark nebulosity here. Click on a dark region like that. Set that as what's called my symmetry point. And then I'm going to stretch it out ever so slightly. Now notice, you look here, you see I'm bringing out some more detail. Don't go too far, obviously, because you don't want to blow the highlights out and lose all the detail. But I just try to do a nice, like a gentle, slow stretch here to bring out some of the details here. Then I might just back off on it just a tad. A little bit of highlight control here just to block the highlights, but not too much. And then I'll bring up my shadows just a little bit. And you can see there, because you have the symmetry point set, it's going to block how much of the shadows you can bring out, but it does bring out some more of the details. And that's about where I'm going to go with it at this point. So you can see, here is the image after we did narrowband normalization, and now with GHS, look at all the detail it brought out. It's quite impressive, I think, when you can bring that much more detail out of an image you already stretched in the first place, went through the narrowband normalization process, and then you can go from there. And then from there, I could go in and do my color masking, although I think the colors are pretty decent as it is. Another trick I'm going to show you that I use consistently is I use curves. I'm going to go here, do a preview of the image, and then I'm going to go into RGB mode, and I'm going to draw a slight S curve, just a little bit here on the dark side and on the light side, and draw kind of an S. So now you have 3 points here within the curve, or within the histogram. And now I'm going to do something that I learned in a Photoshop class about 15 or so years ago, where you do a slight curve and then you move the bottom of the curve a bit. And see, as I'm moving it more to the right, how that increases the contrast just a little bit. Obviously, you don't want to go all the way out here, and you don't want to go all the way down here. But if you just move it slightly, that'll increase your contrast a little bit, increase your definition. And again, this was before I did the curve, after. And what I like about it is it draws the viewer's attention to the central part of the image where I typically want them to look. I want to help guide them as they're looking at the image that I've created. And it's just a standard thing you do in any type of digital photography where you're shooting landscapes or portraits. You want the image to be in such a way that the viewer is going to look at an image the way you want to look at them to look at it. So this is basically how that works with the dragons of Ara. And then from here, I might go in, I might use color masking and adjust it a little bit. I definitely would bring in the stars later on. And there is a script that I use. It's from SETI Astro. And I've done it multiple ways. I've used the SETI Astro method recently just because I haven't had a chance to take RGB stars. Normally, I would take RGB stars. I would, set up maybe an hour's worth of imaging time just to shoot the RGB stars themselves. And then I would use Bill Blanchen's RGB to narrowband script to actually process those stars, and it creates a very natural look. But I found I've gotten some decent results just by using SETI Astro script, where I can combine the O3 stars, the S2 stars, and the HA stars. If it's a mono image, obviously you're going to be using those individual channels. If it's two dual band, narrow band filters, you're still going to have those S, H, and O stars. They're going to be there as channels as well. Or if you're just using a regular dual band filter, you can use this to do that, as well as doing a stretch as well. And I'll do this in a preview mode. I'll look at the stretch. That's a default of typically 5. I'll typically bring it down just a little bit so they're not overstretched. And then I'll go ahead and combine those using screen stars, which is another Bill Blanchard script to bring them all together. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. Okay, so that's my presentation on how to use narrowband normalization. Are there any questions?
Yeah, David, your starting point for the mono, were you just using channel combination to set up the 3 channels?
Yeah, I did that,
Yeah.
but the first thing I did for each channel by itself, I ran Star Exterminator. Then I went ahead and removed the stars, set them up in their own little image set for SHO stars. Then from there, I did channel combination.
Okay.
Yeah. And then from there, I did background neutralization and, all that good stuff. And also noise exterminator. And by the way, if you haven't tried the new version of noise exterminator, that is like 10 times better than the previous versions. I'm having a lot of fun with that particular product now.
David, going along with what Randy just asked, you take the SHO channels from a mono camera, and there's no adjustment to any of those channels. They just come right out of the camera.
For a mono camera, again, I don't have a mono camera, but for the images I've acquired where they have S, H, and O, all you do is you once you go ahead and run when I get the raw images, say from Telescope Live, what they're providing is a calibrated set of S, H, and O images. So all I have to do is stack them, run them through the standard WBPP process in Pixinsight. And then from there, I get a master light for sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen. I have 3 master lights that I'm dealing with. So then from there, I'll take each master light, I'll run blur exterminator, remove the stars through star exterminator, and then I'll go ahead and do channel combination in Pixinsight.
So that sounds like you're no adjustment other than blur exterminator and removing stars.
Yeah, and the only adjustment, once I do the channel combination, I do run background neutralization.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious how you were getting your starting point.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and in the case of this script, less is more. When you start doing things like SPCC, or which shouldn't even be done to a narrowband filter in the first place, yeah. But when you start doing all that stuff and you do a link stretch, you kind of you limit what narrowband normalization is designed to do. And I've even seen when I saw Adam Block now has a course. If you're a subscriber to Adam Block's educational materials, he has a really good website. I've learned a lot from him, especially when I first started out. But he had a video that he produced about narrowband normalization when the process, as a process, first came out, and he was doing everything wrong. And I even emailed him about it. And I said, Adam, you're not doing it right. And he spent a lot of time trying to recover after it didn't look good, and eventually got to the point where he wanted. But there are a lot of people that I think sometimes if you know too much, it can defeat it can really hurt you. In this case, there is a lot of people out there that are using it incorrectly, unfortunately, in terms of the pre-processing workflow. And I think it's really due to the fact that if you look at the Bill Blanchard video later on, he'll say that the image needs to be neutralized and stretched, but he didn't specify what type of stretch. So a lot of people assumed it was like a link stretch, and there's a problem with that. The colors do not look the same. And I just did a comparison. I was looking at one of Luco Manico's more recent videos before he was doing unlinked stretch. Then for some reason in the last video he did a link stretched, and it was also with the Cygnus Wall. It was the North American Nebula. And I looked at his video and I compared it to what I had done a year ago using my little setup. And by doing a link stretch, it messed up the colors. You really do a lot of damage to the image when you do things that you shouldn't be doing. So I've helped a lot of people on Facebook when I see their images and I see that they didn't use the right workflow. Try to help them out, and then I'll get a response back saying, "Yeah, they changed everything." So, and I knew that some of the people in our group were trying to use narrowband normalization, but they were getting caught up with the workflow. That's why I wanted to do this presentation.
So,
Question.
David, after you do the unlinked stretch, that's when you turn it into a nonlinear format?
Well, the unlinked stretch changes it from linear to nonlinear. We're just not linking the RGB channels together.
Right.
Yeah, that's the only difference. That's why we're using an unlinked stretch.
I have a question.
Yes.
I recently did the same image from a telescope live. I used a workflow fairly similar to yours with one big exception. I usually in my workflow start off quite early with gradient extermination.
Mm-hmm.
Notice you haven't done any. Is there a reason for that?
As I said in the beginning, though, I did say if you need to do some gradient removal, go ahead and do it. So if I see that there are gradients, I'll remove them. And I haven't had any issues with running narrowband normalization after doing that. You just got to be careful because sometimes these gradient removal tools will mess with the colors of your nebula. Now, SETI Astro does have a automatic background extraction utility now that he has. It kind of does what Graxpert does, or with DBE does. But you do have the option of selecting areas that you don't want to be included with that. So there are ways to handle that and leave out the nebulosity so it's not making it into a problem issue. I have had situations with Graxpert where it leaves the nebulosity alone and the colors are intact, and I've had other issues with Graxpert where it messes it all up too. So you just got to be careful when you do your gradients.
It's when I do my gradients, I don't reserve special areas on the images, but I'll do three. I use ADB
Mm-hmm.
from SETI. I use Graxpert, and also now the multi-scale gradient correction. And then I just look at the three of them.
Right.
Sometimes I'll do a blink
Right.
between them and all this, and pick out whichever one looks to be the best.
Yeah, I do the same
The other
thing.
two.
I do the same thing because it's different for each image.
Yeah.
if anybody wants to see me doing a real mono image start to finish, I can show you that. I don't know how much time we have, but I do have a project reserved so I could bring that up in Pixinsight if you wanted to see it strictly from, mono images. That's up to you.
Hey, David, could I ask you a question? You're referring to stretch or linked and unlinked stretches, and that's in the STF, which is not a permanent stretch until you do a
Right,
histogram transformation or a GHS.
right.
At what point do you, I'm following your workflow here. At what point do you apply that permanent stretch?
Oh, well, let me give you an example. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share Pixinsight. Okay, can everybody see Pixinsight again?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, let me go back here. Share. You see it now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Okay, so one, okay, great. Hold on. Okay, now everybody should see my Pixinsight screen. Um, when you go into Bill Blanchard's YouTube channel, he has all of his stuff listed below, not just the link for narrowband normalization, but he also has a bunch of his other scripts. And one of the scripts is called Bill's Unlinked Stretch with curve adjustments. So can you see that pixel math dialog there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
This is basically what I use. So all I do is I drag and drop it, or I'll just take the whole thing and I'll select it onto the image that I want to do the unlinked stretch with.
And
Um,
that's your final stretch, correct?
yes,
Okay.
it's unlinked. So I'm
Okay.
not linking or locking the RGB channels, which I've already mapped the SH and O to. I'm not locking those because when you lock them in a linked stretch where they're all linked together, that kind of hobbles what narrowband normalization is trying to do, right? It's trying to normalize it by using HA as a reference for the O3 and the S2, and it can't do that properly if you use a linked stretch. That's why you have an unlinked. But the other thing that I really like about this is, and I'll give you a quick example here. I'm going to go into bring this one thing up. Okay, I'm going to bring this up. Oh, that's not the one I want. Sorry. Hold on. I'm going to bring up the Edicarina. Okay. Can everybody see the Edicarina nebulosity there in the screen, the image?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you can see, when I click on the center here, you see how bright this is here? If some of these are like, okay, so this one, the green channel is like 9204. All the detail is washed out here. What I like about Bill's unlinked stretch, you could do an unlinked stretch any way you want, right? Um, but this has a curves adjustment. And what it says here is this feature allows you to modify the curve being used. So a value higher than 1, for example, 1.03, will give you more of an arc sync style curve, thus reducing the highlights. Well, look at this image. Look at how bright it is. There are many times where I have like a bright O3 region, and it's a little bit too bright. I'll go ahead and let's say I'll go to 103. I'll just go ahead and try it out here just to see what happens. And I made a little bit of an error here. There's one thing I forgot to tell you. Let's go back here. I'm going to undo this. The one thing you want to do is you want to undo the preview here for this image. And I should have done it this way. Let's see. Well, it's not going to work, but the basic function of this is such that let's go ahead and do a 105. So now you can see the values are a little lower now. Typically, you'd want to get rid of the stretched view of it. I might have stretched this already, not even known that. That might be a part of the problem here too. But it does allow you to change things using the curve.
Well, I'm glad you got into that, David, because everything you had done, I was, like the previous comment, misunderstanding what you were calling unlinked stretch.
Yeah.
And it has a whole different meaning the way you're using it.
Yeah, and remember that with STF, you have this little clip here
Right,
that links all the channels.
right.
But
But
in
you,
the case, yeah, you don't want to do that. You want to have it unlinked. So you could do whatever you want here and then use histogram transformation to do that.
exactly.
The other thing you could do is, and again, this is another freebie from SETI Astro. The only thing I don't like about SETI Astro, for some reason, sometimes his stuff will crash Pixinsight for me, which I don't appreciate. But you see here, he has a little box that says link stretch. If you unclick it, now the stretch is going to be unlinked. So there's many ways you can do it. But this has what's called a curves boost. I'm not sure if it's similar to Bill Blanchard's, but I'm a big fan of Bill's stuff. He writes some really good stuff, and it's really well done. You can't go wrong with any of Bill Blanchard's scripts and processes that he's come out with. But I like using it just because I have a lot of control using this curve. And if I was doing it correctly, and I didn't have a pre-stretched image, you'd be able to see better. But this is what I use. I use this. If I need to use the curve thing, I'll use it. If I don't, I'll just leave it at the default. But that's what I use to do the stretching.
Okay. Well, that's important to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back in here and I've stopped my sharing.
Okay, any further questions for David?
No, that was very helpful, especially once we got that last bit of information.
Yeah, yeah. It took me a while to get it too. I made my share of mistakes, believe me. And I've had a conversation with Bill Blanchard saying, "What's wrong with the image?" I ran SPCC and I did a link stretch. He goes, "Why are you running SPCC? You shouldn't be doing that."
Sure.
I even contacted Adam Block once because if you've worked with Adam Block in the past, like if you're one of his subscribers and you put a note to him in his email with a question, sometimes he'll just call you up directly on your cell phone because you're supposed to give him your number as well. And I've had a couple of occasions, like when I was asking Adam Block, "Hey, I'm using the IDAS NBZ dual band filter. What filter setting should I use with SPCC?" And he calls me up on the phone, literally within about a minute, and says, "Why do you want to use SPCC with a narrowband image?" I go, "I don't know. I thought you had to do it." "No, you don't." Then he explained to me why. But because it uses the GIA star catalog, and with a narrowband filter, it's not designed to work with a narrowband filter. It's not designed to work that way. You're not going to get a decent calibration with it. And typically, when you're using that type of a filter, you're going to do something that's more artistic anyways, like what we're doing with narrowband normalization.
But David, this is Craig.
Yeah.
With SPCC, you can have filter profiles in there that describe how your filter is cutting the channels.
Yeah, you can.
And doesn't that still make SPCC work for a narrowband filter?
You can try it. I've tried it. It will mess it up. And this is directly from the author of the program, Bill Blanchard, told me do not use SPCC specifically.
What about for non-narrowband?
Oh yeah. I use it all the time for
normalization.
my broadband images. I use it all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, but I wouldn't use it with a true narrowband filter.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't even think the IDAS NBZ is listed on that list of filters. I mean, whatever's listed on the list of filters with SPCC is an option. You can use those, but I don't believe the IDAS NBZ UHS filter or the ASCAR D2 or D1 or C1 or C2 filters. These are all strictly narrow band filters. It's not like a quad filter, and it's not like actually a tri-band RGB filter where it's mainly a light pollution filter. These are specifically narrowband filters that I'm talking about for what we're doing.
Just to- David,
You
just
can,
as a, oh, sorry.
you can set up the profile though. You can create.
oh yeah, you can.
So I've got the NBZ, I've got the Antlia tri-band profiles. They exist, and you
Right.
can load them into SPCC.
Yeah, yeah, and you could do that, and I would say, if you want to try it with narrowband normalization, I would try it with and without SPCC and see what the differences
Sure.
are. But I think you'll definitely see a difference. The problem is if you don't know that and you're just running through the standard workflow that you normally do for any other type of image, and then you get into narrowband normalization, you only know what you know, right? So you might say, "Oh yeah, there's a difference there. I could see a difference in using the process, and then I'll go ahead and use Photoshop or something else to colorize it however I want to colorize it." But you won't know that it's wrong. But I've gotten to the point now where I can tell whether something's a little bit off with the image, and usually the image looks kind of washed out, or it's faint, or something happened along the workflow that it doesn't look correct, doesn't look the way it should.
Got it.
Just as an aside to that, I don't want I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm going to try some of this. But Jason Kuhn has a YouTube video on adding custom filters to SPCC. This is for
Yeah.
those people that want to add that, and you can bring in. He has a link to probably about 40 or 50 different filter profiles that you can bring into SPCC and then merge them with the standard Sony IV or UV IR cut filters, which are standard in SPCC, and you can merge those in there. And so, like when I'm shooting with, say, an Optolong L Pro, I can bring that in to the standard Sony UV IR cut filter, and it merges and it gives me a truer color. So, but that's something not
Sure.
necessarily related to what David's referring
Yeah.
to here, but it is something you can do now, which is kind of neat. So.
Yeah.
Hey, David,
I should say that I have done that and compared them, and I no longer use SPCC with the NBC or the tri-band because when I did, I could not tell any difference between the before and the after. So, why go through all that to use it?
David, I would just say that I use the Blanchard, those color masks all the time, and they're
Yeah,
really
they're great.
helpful. A lot of times I'll run them all just to see what they're going to isolate, and then
Yeah.
I know what each of them will do,
Yep.
and usually 3 out of the 5 or however many there are isolate some good things that you can work on. So they're very helpful.
Yeah, he does a good job with those, and they're really fast. There is a routine in the if you go to Pixinsight scripts and then toolkit, there is a similar routine that's built into the scripts, but it's super, super slow to work with. To get a preview, it takes a while. These scripts are really nice and fast and quick.
They're just drag and drop.
Exactly.
And they're done.
Right.
So, they're really good. All right.
okay, if that's all the questions for David, I'm going to stop the recording, and but we can leave the Zoom meeting